announce. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. This event is a part of a series organized by our office in partnership with the College of the Environment's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office. So we've been working together for the past several years to explore the intersections between sustainability, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to encourage the collaboration between the groups working on these issues across the UW. So this Zoom event is being recorded up until we have the breakout discussions so that we can share with people who aren't able to make it today. And then we'll go ahead and stop doing so when we have our small group breakout discussions. So again, welcome. Before we start, I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. The University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land, and the land which touches the shared waters and bands. Pardon me, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. The UW Sustainability Office is part of the larger facilities organization. So we have also invited our Vice President, Lou Cariello, for today's welcome remark. We'll then go ahead into the panel discussion with our esteemed guest speakers, Terrell, Engmann, Chesca Ward, and Judy Tweet. The panel will be moderated by my wonderful colleagues, Drs. Terrell Ross and Isabel Carrera-Zamanillo from the College of the Environment's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Lou Cariello to welcome us.
Thank you, Claudia, and good morning, everyone. It really is an honor for me to be here to welcome you to this event to discuss diversity, equity, and inclusion, along with sustainability. And we're doing it today in collaboration, our partnership with the College of the Environment's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I want to start out for just a minute and acknowledge the challenging times that we are faced with today and have been for some time. Certainly the pandemic has affected all of us. It's made everything that we do that more difficult and uncomfortable. The current increased activity in social justice protests that we see and have been experiencing are very emotional and psychologically challenging for all of us as well. To add on to that, a fairly contentious election year that we're in right around the corner. Please vote next week if you haven't done so already. But these are just really challenging times for all of us. But I will say that I'm really proud of this group, and I want to thank you all for joining us today and being involved in this effort. I think everything that's going on today, the challenges that we're faced with, serves to really highlight the value of the work that we're doing here. This virtual gathering, and quite honestly, our focus before this and after this in the area of equity and as it relates to sustainability, which we'll talk about today. Unfortunately, I was not able to attend the last session here on July 30th. I was away, and I'm really happy that Ricky Hall was able to provide the opening for us, and we value the partnership we have with OMAD. But today we'll have another great group of panel speakers moderated by Terrell Ross and Isabel Carrera-Zamanillo. And our topic is about a just transition. And I'll admit I had a discussion with Claudia earlier this week about the word transition. Exactly what does that mean? I think this term just transition is something we are hearing about more now, and we're going to continue hearing about it. But as I suspected, it was validated in my conversation with Claudia that we're talking about the ongoing transition within society, where we talk more about this, we consider more everything that we do with an equity lens. And it's really healthy for us to be involved in this work. And again, I just want to thank you all for being part of this and doing your part. That's all any of us can do, but it is something that every one of us should do. Whatever it is that we can do to further this conversation that we're having, let's do that and let's be proactive about it. So within facilities, I'll share with you, we have been trying to do our part, and we're going to continue doing our part as much as we can. We recently established a set of strategic goals for our organization. And we are a large organization, about 1,000 people in facilities here for the University of Washington. And we may very well be the most diverse group on campus with our staff. So that creates opportunities for us, I think, in this space. And I will tell you that one of the we have 4 focus areas. One of them is to focus on people, and a foundational element of caring for, engaging with, and connecting with our people is a deliberate strategic initiative to advance equity and inclusion for all of our employees in UW facilities. So that's at the outset. Working to champion that initiative in our group. And along that line, we have established, it's about a year old now, we have a workforce equity group that is a grassroots-based representative group of employees from each one of our units in facilities that we are engaging with to further this conversation and figure out what we can do in facilities to look at things more with an equity lens and create opportunities that are appropriate for empowering and leveraging the talents of our people. So I'll finish up here by just tying this to the Sustainability Action Plan. We launched this plan in July. It's an extension of our 2009 Climate Action Plan. And we have 10 target goals in that space. And one of the overarching themes is to look at our sustainability targets with an equity lens in mind. And we're looking forward to doing that. And this forum is part of that work. So again, I thank you all for being a part of it, doing your part. And I guess I'll turn it back over to Claudia, and we're going to get started with our panel speakers. But again, it's great to be here, and thank you for everything that you're doing to do your part.
Thank you, Lou. Really appreciate the time here and the opportunity to share an update from what is happening at the facilities organization with regard to equity, and then also getting us kind of poised for the conversation with the panel. So I am really excited and very honored to present and introduce Dr. Terrell Ross, Isabel Carrera Zamanillo, and our panelists to take us through the discussion on what just transition is in their respective fields. So with that, I will go ahead and hand it to Terrell and Isabel.
Thank you very much, Claudia. And just before the panel, I want to provide a little bit of a background information about what just transition means. So this is a movement, a framework, and a place-based opportunity to really transform our society and our economy and our political and structural systems from an extractive economy passing to a regenerative economy. It is rooted on the environmental justice and labor movements. It was recognized in the 2015 Paris Agreement, especially towards the recognition that climate change is impacting a disproportionate amount, especially BIPOC and low-income communities who are at the forefront of this. And having that in mind, this new form of governance and economy has to listen to these communities and put the interest, not just the needs, at the forefront of any agenda. Having said that, I want to then welcome Dr. Terrell Ross, who will be moderating this panel.
Thank you, Isabel. And the one thing I want to add is that over the summer, we got a lot of you together, people from the environmental side and people from the DEI side. And we generated some ideas that we would like to see happen. And the first thing that we learned from all of that was people said we need a little bit more foundational work. And so that's why we chose this topic, because it actually touches upon both of those. And then our goal is that when this is done, that we can actually either look at some of the ideas that were generated before or come up with some new ones. But we'd really like to see the University of Washington, which is a lot of us, roll up our sleeves and do more. So to get going on our wonderful panel, I got to meet with them the other day, and I'm very excited. They're very excited. And so we're going to start by having each one of you introduce yourself, and we'll start with you, Chesca.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. My name is Chesca Ward. I am currently the HR director at the Graduate School at the University of Washington. I have been involved in DEI work for the past 20 years. Professionally, I've been in human resources. I've started off on the hiring side of the house, trying to look at bringing more diverse talent into organizations. From there, I evolved into looking at retention. How do we retain diverse talent in organizations once we hire people in? I also have worked at, I was previously the director of the university's supplier diversity program, our business diversity program, where I got a chance to work with diverse suppliers in our local community, women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses, small businesses, and trying to figure out how we can get them into the purchasing and contracting process within the university. So I was able to do that for a few years, and that's where my office was right next door to the UW sustainability program, and got a chance to collaborate with the sustainability program a bit. And then I've also continued since then to integrate DEI into the work that I've been doing with the university. As well, I teach a diversity and globalization course for one of the graduate programs at Seattle Pacific University.
Thank you. Judy?
Thank you. Yes, my name is Judy Tweet. I use she, they pronouns. I'm very happy to be here. Let's see, what shall I say? I'm a fifth generation settler. I grew up in Tacoma, not far from Seattle. And I am a graduate student in the interdisciplinary PhD program, but I came into the PhD program in atmospheric sciences, did my master's there, and now I do work in climate communication. But I'm actually going to be speaking on this panel mostly from my experience actively working in our union, the Graduate Student and Academic Student Employees Union, UAW 4121, and the work that I've done on advancing climate justice through the labor movement. I also just finished a one-year position on the State Environmental Justice Task Force that just released a report. I think it'll be published very soon here, so we'll talk about that a little bit too.
Thank you. Terrell?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm Terrell Engmann. I'm a recent graduate from the University of Washington. I graduated in June of 2019 and did a molecular cellular developmental biology Bachelor's of Science. Following that, I got to travel to explore the theme of health equity in other countries on the Bonderman Fellowship. And so I traveled to South Africa, Namibia, Mozambique, and Ghana, as well as Brazil, and got to visit laboratories, hospitals, and reproductive health facilities, as well as a ton of different types of communities, and then really nailed down on disparity and what that means in the international context. Now I am a graduate student at Boise State University, doing a biomolecular sciences PhD. And I've also started over the summer a community organization called Basilica Bio with some of my friends from the University of Washington, which really is based in these principles of environmental justice and then bringing an equitable change to communities that really deserve it. So I'm excited to talk about that more as well during the panel.
Thank you. Thank all of you. So we've already had just transition defined twice. And so maybe to get us going, if you could make it real, and how is it real to you, a just transition, and how has it been manifested in your life? And we'll start this one with Judy.
Get quick at pressing the unmute key here. So how has it been manifested in my life? Well, I mean, it's an ongoing process. So I can't say that there's like a particular thing, but one thing that I think about a lot, because I have a lot of family history in Washington State, is what happens when we don't have a just transition, that the state was built on a very extractive timber industry that shrank rapidly without managing the transition of the workforce very well. And we saw high levels of unemployment, poverty, and other, associated health impacts in logging communities all across Washington, rural logging communities, right? So we know the devastation that happens when you have an extractive economy transition without justice for workers. What we're seeing right now with community groups, including unions and environmental justice communities, really fighting for a seat at the table to be involved in policy decisions and policy negotiations about how the transition from an extractive to a regenerative economy is going to happen, and what's going to happen to those who are most vulnerable. So in my experience, what that looks like is it's very procedural. It's community organizations that are going to be most affected by the transition, fighting for say and participation and power in determining the policies.
Thank you. Terrell?
Yeah, I think that just transition and these issues of equity are more personal to me than anything that I've been a part of ever, because throughout my entire life, right, I've had to watch through media and hear through local stories of unjust action against people that look like me. So this is a very personal passion of mine, and I think over the summer was highlighted the greatest with the nation finally sort of putting the spotlight on these issues and people starting to take notice and pay attention. And so, yes, I think that this is something that's incredibly personal to me, and how it's manifested is through that sort of helplessness over the summer that I felt. I felt the courage to step up and take action. And I think that now I'm able to speak and not be silenced through my organization, Basilica Bio. And I think that's, all my efforts that I've been putting into that have sort of been my way to have a voice in this space, and to be able to contribute and to be able to fight for others that deserve the same as everybody else. So
Thank you. Chesca?
For me, I guess for me, it comes down to access and opportunity to engage in the process and the discussions, the policies that are being written today and moving forward. You ask about like how it presents in my life. I say that, so I was born in Chicago, not a lovely community of Chicago, but that's where I'm from. That's where my family is. And I can look at my aunts and my uncles and my parents and see the values and homes that everyone was raised in. My cousins, we all look the same. It was a great place to live. And then when I was really young in the 80s, we moved here to King County, and I've grown up in King County, graduated from King County schools. And right away, that switch right there completely changed the rest of my life. Because being here in the Seattle area, I got access to so much more than my cousins got access to. I was presented with so many opportunities that my cousins didn't have access to. One of my first ways of collecting money growing up was recycling cans and newspapers that I'd gathered from whoever would give me their old cans and newspapers. And my mom would drive me down to the recycling plant in Kent, and I would get, $5 or $10, depending on whatever I'd collected. And so recycling was just always a part of who I was. And I just didn't think anything about it. And then composting came along, and that was, again, part of who I was, didn't think anything about it. I go back and visit my family in the Midwest. They don't recycle, they don't compost, they have lots of frozen vegetables, but they don't have all the markets next to them with fresh produce and farmers markets the way that I do here in Seattle. Just being here, I had access to so much more educationally knowledge about climate that they didn't have in their communities. And so if you look at myself and my cousins who were raised by parents who were raised in the same house, same values, like we are in completely different places right now because I had access, because I had opportunities to engage. So as I think about my past experience and I think about where we're standing today and looking forward to what it means for my daughter and her friends, as many different viewpoints as I can get integrated and involved today, that's going to make a huge impact and a huge difference in the future. But if it's narrowly defined about who's involved right now, then that's how it's going to translate in the future. It's going to be a narrow scope of influence in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. And so now the next question, and some of you actually touched upon this, but I want to kind of look at the national context. Are there any issues that are going on in society? And then the word that I've heard a lot today is policy. Are there any policies that you think could help facilitate the type of just transition that you'd like to see? And Terrell to start with that.
Definitely, yes. I think that at the center, as was put in the introduction to this topic, at the center of this is people. And switching from an extractive economy to a more regenerative economy, or an extractive system to a more regenerative and equity focused one, really is rooted in people. And so that looks like people in the labor force. And so I think that a large majority of this conversation has to do with people that are in these professions now, right? And typically who have been exposed to all sorts of carcinogens and toxins, which lead to chronic disease in the future. Moving them out of these jobs, which harm everyone involved, including them, and moving them to more green jobs. And I think in California, a figure that I've seen is they have green jobs in the numbers of hundreds of thousands. I think it was 500,000 versus the number of jobs in the extractive system that we have right now is magnitudes lower. So there really is a benefit to everyone to have that transition, as well as promoting food sovereignty in communities all across the nation. I think people deserve to, sort of like Chesca touched on, have a secure and healthy food source that they know where their fresh fruits and vegetables are coming from, and it's accessible. I think that's the most important thing, is to have equitable access to these resources. So yeah, those are a few points that I think nationwide are now coming to the surface and people are looking at more critically. And I'm excited to be part of that conversation.
Thank you. And I just wanted to make sure the audience knows that if you have any questions for our wonderful panel, send them to us in the chat, and then throughout this panel we'll try to get to some of those. And so now I'd like to have Chesca answer the same thing.
Yes, definitely. And I will say, as I start to answer this, that there are definitely people on this panel today who have more expertise in the climate policy than I do. So I won't speak on the climate policy, but what I've witnessed in terms of people and the national discussion taking place is that we do have a lot of discussions taking place about the climate and the changes that are needed and how we're going to move things forward. As I've been watching the election process, I've seen a number of conversations come up and take place where people have thoughts. And I guess when I look at the national context, I want to make sure that we're including the people and the communities that are being impacted in these conversations. Like if we are changing an industry altogether, if we're trying to phase out an industry, that industry creates employment opportunities for people currently. So how are we working on job training, job transitioning for those employees? And if we're trying to phase out an entire industry, or if we're bringing on a new industry of technology, how can we ensure that our community training programs are bringing people in? Or how are we leveraging transferable skills that someone had in one industry, but now that things have evolved, they need to work in a different way? Like, how are we leveraging the existing workforce rather than displacing the current workforce as we're changing things nationally as we need to, and globally for our planet? So it's really, how are we thinking about those aspects, and not just coming up with new policies because this is what got voted through or something like that, but how are we bringing the people along and the communities along with us as we're developing those processes and policies?
Thank you. Judy?
Yeah, and I see a couple of questions here in the chat that I think I can integrate into this question, into my answer. So just transition is like focusing on people in the transition. And we can think about sort of just transition policies, you know, at the federal level and at the state level and at the very local level. And one of the key ingredients in just transition is, you know, as industries are changing, that you're protecting the rights of workers in those industries to have a say in how that happens. So, you know, we have talked about the growing force, the clean energy economy, and then also the, you know, the extractive economy, people working in pipe fitting and in natural gas. Those jobs are, like, those industries are older, which means also that there's more worker infrastructure in those. Those jobs are highly paid. They have really good healthcare and really good benefits. And those details matter so much, right? We're experiencing a crisis right now that we can use as an analog to the climate crisis. Massive changes in our livelihoods, massive changes in public health that are affecting people who are the most vulnerable, affecting them the worst. And we know that people who have stable employment and have access to healthcare are more resilient to crisis. So when we're transitioning industries, it's not enough to say there's more jobs in the green economy. They also have to be high quality jobs that protect the right of workers to organize and have a say in the contracts that they sign affecting their livelihood. And that's really a really tricky but very important part of this.
Thank you. And so I do see a question from Forrest. I think it's Forrest Baum. And Forrest wants to know, you know, we just got done talking about the national perspective. He wants to know, how do we start? You know, what can we do locally? And so, Chesca, I'll have you start.
So I guess there's a number of different things that come to mind. So I'm going to go back to the hiring side and the integrating people in. Terrell mentioned in his introduction that he started up a new organization with some of his UW friends just this past summer. That's an example where I've seen current UW students or recent grads start their own businesses and organizations. I've seen people look for funding so that it will help their business get started. And as you're talking about funding and thinking about hiring people, how can you think about, as Judy was just mentioning, that you want to hire a diverse workforce? It could be that some of the people that you want to hire can't afford to be without benefits. They can't afford, you know, to cover their own medical cost. So for them to come work in your new startup business that's going to impact the climate in a great way, they need to figure out not just how to pay for their rent and food for their family, but now they need to build in the expense of medical. So if I am starting a business, if I'm an entrepreneur bringing people in, how can I think about that as part of my foundation of including benefits for some of the folks that I'm trying to bring in. So that's the way to make it easier for people to participate and engage along the way. Because oftentimes people that are able to take advantage of the newer industries, the startup opportunities, are those people that can afford to float their rent for a few months if income isn't coming in from the business. And so how can we build that into our proposals as we're looking at funders to care for our people? That's just one very specific kind of thing, but that kind of came to mind as I was thinking about Terrell's introduction, and that, you know, how can we start locally? Think about how you're hiring, how you're setting up organizations from the very start, and where do the people fit into those projects. Let's say I'm a student group here at the university and I'm creating a new proposal for something. How do I integrate people into that part of it, that discussion there? So integrating people all the time from the start.
Thank you. Judy, you have any thoughts about kind of local efforts?
Well, yeah, I think, again, because the climate crisis and environmental injustice affects us in so many different ways, we can think a lot very holistically about how we're developing resilience at the local level, and that's part of the just transition. So within the university, there's efforts just over the summer by the BIPOC Professional Staff Alliance to push back against pay freezes, right? Because it's hard to live in this city on a low income. We're seeing groups like the UW Union Coalition fighting and working together to ensure that we have access to fully funded UPass so that we can, you know, support transit equity and be able to get ourselves around the city carefully. Part of a just transition is building a thriving and affordable city. So there's a lot of local ways to engage in the just transition that you might not think of them in a linear way, but if they're about building affordable and livable and thriving cities where people can access affordable housing and public transportation, that's part of growing the resilience that we need for a just transition.
Thank you. Terrell, do you have anything else to say about local?
Yeah, I think that to answer this question, I can talk a little bit about what I and a few others at Basilica Bio, our intention was when we started this organization, and how we want to help Seattle and in our community, and continuing to expand down into Tacoma, which is where I really grew up for most of my life. But yeah, things like developing curriculum for K through 12 students to have a better understanding of public health and how environment, right, the environment that they live in affects their health is a massive piece of it. And having it be interactive and something that is interesting, because really when you're learning about that stuff, you're learning about your own life and how different factors can affect what you have to deal with later on in terms of disease. So we see that in certain communities, there are increased amounts of pollutant emitting facilities and different disamenities, highways, lack of green space, lack of access to healthy food sources. And so actually teaching about that and letting the students know, hey, how can I tie this to my community, and what can I advocate for my own community so that I can, benefit my life and those around me. And in addition to that, getting them involved. And so again, the theme of this is people. So community-led action projects is a big part of the work that we do at Basilica Bio. And the first thing that we're gonna do is we're working with the Black Farmers Collective and Yes Farm to put together urban farms and community gardens in tandem with this curriculum. So you're learning about the very important pieces regarding environmental justice, public health, as well as getting hands-on, doing tangible solution, because I think sometimes we can get caught up in the conversation and not get out there and start to put things together. So promoting food security, right? Combating food insecurity through giving more access, right? By spreading the food sources throughout Seattle, I think is a great thing. Another thing is community-led research into, different ways to remediate soil, because in our communities, there are increased amounts of these pollutants. And so, getting innovative about it and using the knowledge that we have that has been sequestered from BIPOC communities and low-income communities for such a long time, spreading that information and saying, hey, now you take the charge. You're going to be at the forefront of this research using cutting-edge biotechnology. So those are some of the things that we're doing locally that I'm really excited about. And I definitely was, when I heard about this panel, so excited because at the center again is people, and I love to speak to the people aspect of our environment, and it's not really just a conversation about being sustainable. It's a conversation about how our society can be equitable and sustainable, right? Because equity is sustainability. So yeah.
Thank you.
Can I jump in with something real quick?
Sure.
Because Terrell said something and it made me think, because he mentioned like the K through 12 education, and educating people early on, our youth early on. And it made me think about, I have a 5-year-old daughter, and she is learning so much more about the climate and what she needs to do as a responsible citizen than I ever learned in preschool and in those early years. So I'm very fortunate for where she is and her peers and where they're going to be moving forward. And as I think about that education piece and the community education piece, and Judy and Terrell, I don't know if you guys have things on this, but it makes me think about how do we make all of this so that it translates to people of different age groups, because if people have come through the environmental conversations in different decades, for example, they might have different pieces of information available to them, and keeping the information so it's still accessible and understanding. Like if someone hasn't been actively involved in our climate change conversations recently, and they just heard about just transition, would they be like, I don't know what that is, that's too advanced for me, I can't participate? How do we make it so that no matter what your age is, no matter what it is that you know about the climate and sustainable change, that we can create information and educational opportunities so that anyone can get involved at any time, no matter where you are, no matter what your income is, like no matter what you know. So I'm just thinking about changing different people's minds and bringing different groups of people along. It's fabulous to start with K through 12 so that they can build it as a foundation of their lives. But we also need to work with some people that maybe were taught some different things. Like I can say of my generation, we were taught more that you needed to grow up to make enough money to be able to afford a car, and drive your own car at that. And it should be a big, nice car, not ride the bus. That was counter to how we were taught that success looks. So how can you educate someone that might be a peer of mine that might have a similar mindset to help them get involved as well? So yeah, keeping our information accessible to everyone, I guess.
Thank you. And I'm actually
Yeah.
gonna. What's that?
Oh no, I just wanted to speak to that if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, I think that at the center of all of this work is breaking down barriers. And so education is a massive barrier to people, which when it shouldn't be, right? It's one of the social determinants of health is education. And so in doing this, and this is just starting out, like I mentioned earlier, we started this in mid-May, and recently we were given access to a plot of land already, right? So in 5 months, we've really been going so quickly. But to start out, we want to do this K through 12 curriculum, but I don't think that it should stop there, because I think you're absolutely right there. Opening it up to all community members that want to learn more about these processes and to learn more about their community and ways that they can help, and putting them at the center, making them the lead, is really important, because I think that science and one of the things that I really hope to do with this organization is to break down the barriers in science, because science has so many barriers, especially at different institutions. And I think that STEM students, Black STEM students, especially at the University of Washington over the summer, had really long conversations with each other, as well as administration, in terms of how to advocate more for diversity in science, and to break down the barriers that are associated with education, and to open it up to more people, so that we can all benefit and we can all take action, right? And all make tangible change that is needed in our community. So yeah, I think that that's a wonderful consideration, and I really appreciate you sharing that, because I share that same sentiment. So
thank you. So we got another good thought in the chat from Gary Henwork, and he basically says, we haven't talked about capitalism, and so that's the word that's been missing so far today. And do any of you have any thoughts on that, about capitalism and where we're trying to go? Any insights into how to do that, and what's working, what's not?
The item that I have related to capitalism, I guess, I don't know. In the symposium in the summer, when I was sitting in with one of our breakout groups and we were talking, I was mentioning to the group that I was in that when I was younger, it was like some people did buy clothes from secondhand, or from a thrift store or whatever, but that was considered like you can't afford it. That was looked upon poorly. And so it was this, you have to be able to buy your own brand new clothes off the rack consistently. And so this mentality, like you have to buy, that is what success is equal. And then now I see buy nothing. I see people sharing things. Like my daughter is part of a clothes train of people. Another girl will give her clothes, and when she's done with them, we'll give them to another girl, and we keep passing clothes around. And so we're sharing. And so we're raising youth of today a little bit differently than in the past, but we still have this process where we say success equals, that you have to buy something, you have to have something shiny, you have to have something new. And so there is this, how do we solve kind of grown-up behavior that's already there? But as I'm looking at today's youth, I'm hoping that we can continue to encourage them and teach them, not that you can't afford something, therefore you're on the outs, or you're not cool, or whatever terms kids use today, because that's probably not a cool word anymore. But I'm hoping that we continue to teach kids that they are part of the process already at young ages, no matter where they are, and that sharing and recycling and composting, all of that is part of the solution. So at 5, you are part of the solution. But I do not have the answer on how to fix the other things. Maybe Judy and Terrell, you might have thoughts on that.
Yeah, how do we address capitalism?
Well, I think about the fact that, right now with COVID, I think the most recent statistic I saw was that 4 out of every 10 people have either lost their job or have had their wages affected by this pandemic. And at the same time, this city in particular is sort of supporting the first trillionaire. I mean, that's just baffling, right? When there's so much need and so much suffering and so much concentration of wealth. So I think the question should be asked by everyone is a regenerative economy that doesn't sacrifice the well-being of the future generations for profits in the present moment, is that compatible with capitalism or not? I think everyone should ask themselves that question, right? Yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay. Was that everybody, or no, Terrell?
Oh no, yeah, just me. Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I appreciate the input from Chesca and Judy on this, and I think from my perspective, from my young perspective, which I'm very, I'm still learning about a lot of these systems, and I'm still learning about, my own life, and, how to schedule my own doctor's appointments and things like that at 21. So from my perspective, I think the issues that we're talking about, a lot of them stem from our systems in place, and changing those systems I've found is difficult. So I often go back and forth about, what the best way to tackle these issues is. I think community sort of getting together and attacking the sort of symptoms of the problem, because at its core, I'm sure that we're all aware that the problem is much larger and much deeper rooted in the country than we typically admit in public discourse. So, I think doing community action and gathering together and attacking the symptoms at the very least, and I think at multiple levels, we can have engagement that can lead to change, but the capitalism question is very difficult, because from my perspective, I don't think that there's much that I can do in terms of changing or uprooting a whole system that's what the country does, right? But what I can do in my own backyard in Seattle is make sure that the needs of people are met in terms of what I'm doing with this organization, and making sure that I'm not silent and I'm speaking up for people, and I'm helping in all areas that I can. So it becomes a very big conversation very quickly, but I think my perspective is staying focused and trying to do what I can right now, if that makes sense.
Thank you. And that is, unfortunately, we are just about out of time. And we did get a good question from Patrick Christie, a little bit about kind of, how about working with academics, and also a little bit about, maybe what's going on here at the U, but we don't have any more time. And so I just want to thank the panel